Hey everybody, welcome to a new show. This is Mark and my brother Jim. We are formerly known as Lead Balloon Rock Talk. We're rebranding now, same show, same style, same us, and we're now going to be called JaMs, Jim and Mark's Rock and Roll Museum. We hope you like this. It's not really changing a whole lot, but we think the name is pretty cool. Anyway, we have a really cool show. Oh, go ahead.
And you'll notice that we are together.
Yes.
Even though COVID is still happening, we're both teachers and we're both fully vaccinated, and it's around spring break time, so we've had a chance to get together, and we thought it would be great to do a show or two together in the same room, as opposed to the many miles that had separated us.
It's really cool. No more Zoom for at least a couple shows, right?
Yes.
So our show topic for today, I think, is a great one. We've always been kicking around this idea for quite a while, actually, and we never did anything with it. And what we had in mind was we've always talked about all these really great bands that we grew up with. And, there are certain bands that had a specific sound. And we started talking about this American sound or Americana sound. And so we want to kind of elaborate a little bit on that today, share some of our thoughts on that verbiage, if you will, but also bring in some bands that we think fit that to a T. It is basically a musical genre if you look it up.
Oh, it is.
You call it roots music, but
yeah.
I think we'll keep referring to it as Americana music. So, you can like or dislike. We certainly can't talk about every group out there. You might have some of your own thoughts, and that's perfectly acceptable. And we always encourage you to comment if you like something, or even if you dislike something, just let us know what's going on. So with that being said, we're going to just kind of casually go into this conversation. Do have some notes here that we took down. But we're going to kind of just talk a little bit about, this is how we formulate our shows. You kind of get to see how we bounce ideas back and forth long distance. But today we're going to actually kind of bounce things right here in person. So looking forward to this show, and sit back, grab some popcorn, get something to drink. Hopefully it'll be a good one for you guys. So let's just talk a little bit about the term Americana for a second.
Yeah, and I think we have to start at the word roots music, because roots music is it's become a more popular term over the last couple decades, and it really encompasses what preceded what we call the rock and roll era. It encompasses blues, it encompasses folk rock, it encompasses some of the political activist music that was coming out in the early 20th century.
We can't leave out rhythm and blues, gospel, country. They're all part of this.
So, and at the time, back in the early 20th century, country music was referred to as hillbilly music in a lot of ways, or mountain music. And R&B was more race music. And thankfully, some of these terms have been updated and changed. But what has happened in the United States is that we have this great diversity of musical styles that started to coalesce into different forms. So in other words, melding blues with some of the country elements, or some of the earlier jazz with some of the gospel. There was just and that's just a couple of examples. And what has happened is that the music that a lot of bands here in the United States developed styles that embraced several of these components and became a sound that we kind of hear as Americana. And there are certain bands over other bands that are more along those lines.
And I think we're going to hit on some of those really bigger bands today. Obviously, some of the ones that pop out, you might already be thinking about yourselves. But we're going to definitely be hitting on the Grateful Dead in a little bit here. But before we jump into some of the bands, I want to give you guys out there an article that is really, really good for preparation for this show that I think I'm going to share with everybody here. The website was youdiscovermusic.com, all lowercase. But the article was written by Martin Chilton, and it was published May 1st of 2020. It was
So very recent.
yeah,
actually.
it's a very recent article. It was very in depth, very well written, very well researched, and I'm pulling a lot of my notes from that article, to be honest with you, because I felt it was so well done. It was just phenomenal how it was put together, and really kind of tied my thoughts on this particular episode together. And so I think it's really good if you guys wanted this. Go to that website, check it out, read it for yourself. I think you'll understand where we're coming from after we do this episode. So just wanted to throw that out there. I'll just throw that website one more time for you. It's youdiscovermusic.com. And the article, again, is by Martin Chilton, published on May 1st in 2020. So let's just start this off. Our conversation started actually about this when we started talking about a couple of the bands that I'm about ready to say here. Number one is The Band. We had extensive conversations, the two of us, on The Band that never made it here onto YouTube and to this channel. But, we really both like this band a lot. And it's hard to say The Band. But, Robbie Robertson and the whole group, for the most part, is basically Canadian.
Yep.
And here we are, we're talking about this Americana sound. But, my goodness, they enveloped that sound so uniquely. I think part of that is because they were hanging around with Bob Dylan so much, and that influence of the storytelling and the writing and just that particular influence. But the band is just that unique sound. And, let me just put this out there. The band, believe it or not, influenced other bands such as the Allman Brothers, Eric Clapton, and of course the Dead. Now the Dead, of course, they were influenced by a whole lot of different
and
people.
I think the Dead almost fall into a category unto themselves in a sense. Let me backtrack just a little bit. So, to really capture the essence of what Americana is if we went back to the 50s with the original rock and roll. The original rock and roll that Elvis and Lee Lewis, what's his first name?
Jerry Lee Lewis.
Jerry Lee Lewis, thank you. Sorry.
It's okay.
So many things going on in my head.
Brain fart.
Carl Perkins, Johnny Cash even. What they embraced, the early rock and roll, was country music melded with the blues, melded with other elements that were coming out around the South, and it was rockabilly in a sense.
Yeah. It really revolves. This sound really revolves around the idea of not Southern rock, but a Southern sensibility, if you would. That deep-rooted folkness.
Yeah, and that evolved, and then so you look at the '60s when the band came out, and Bob Dylan, and the Grateful Dead. They had embraced, so like Bob Dylan drew upon the whole folk music ideals, storytelling, and in a musical language that was extremely approachable by the common folk. That's what folk music is. It's music of the people, for the people, that was not supposed to be popular. And so they kind of took this and
I think you're absolutely right on the money with that. That's a great description.
Yeah,
that's a really good description.
And so then you have a band like The Band, who through Bob Dylan took it to a new level and really created some timeless music.
Yeah, for sure. So I was going to sit and talk today a little bit about The Band and the Dead. And we've had conversations about the Dead, and we could sit here and have a full show, maybe 5 shows just about the Grateful Dead.
Right.
But that's not the point for today. But the idea is to try to get this concept of what the Americana sound is. And I think, as much as I love the band, I want to bring it more into more modern times. And I think I'm going to just throw it out there. But, we both concurred that Tom Petty is that essence here in more modern times here, as I say, modern times, here in the 2000s.
Well, the more contemporary time.
Yeah, contemporary.
Yeah, for sure.
Not that the Grateful Dead are, they're still playing in another form, but they are still producing the same type of sound, the same kind of music, and that following. That I think that is what is so powerful. You know, Tom Petty. Wow, what a showman he was, you know, and he could pick up any guitar, make it just do amazing things. And I just love Tom Petty. And again, here's that storytelling, very similar to the Bob Dylan style of writing, but musically speaking, it was just on a different level too. So
well, and he brought in elements of country. He brought in elements of the blues. He brought in elements of folk music, again, and melded it into a style that was all his own. But when you listen to him, and he is very recognizable. I mean, you listen to any song and you can kind of instantly say, "Oh, this is Tom Petty." But there's also a sound that it sounds American and or Americana, and it's hard to put a finger on exactly what makes it that, but it's all these elements that are coming together.
So there was a word that was used in I think it was in that article that I was mentioning, the term rustic.
Yeah. That's a great
to describe
word.
this Americana sound. And I thought, wow, that's a really good term. It's just rustic, it's down and dirty, it's not refined.
Yeah.
It's
it's not overly processed or produced.
Produced,
yeah, for sure. I would throw out a couple of other names too. One would be Bruce Springsteen, because he brings in a lot of the storytelling elements and the folk aspects, although he brings in a harder rock edge sometimes as well.
Yeah.
And I would also throw out John Mellencamp. And particularly as you listen to some of his later material, where he does purposely bring in elements of the Midwest. And you think about his the cause Farm Aid that he did. That, you know.
And it's funny because these musicians we're all talking about, every one of them, like, intermingled with each other. They knew each other, they hung out with each other, and they obviously shared ideas with one another. And that was really pretty important, I think.
Yeah.
And
but they also saw the importance of this music.
Yeah, but I got to tell you, you know, if you didn't look this up, it's amazing. I did some quick numbers here on Tom Petty. He has 68 singles.
Wow, that's a lot.
16 studio albums.
Yeah.
That's mind-bending right there, just in itself. I mean, and there's still people who have never even heard of him.
Yeah.
And yet, look at the influence, and it's incredible. So, you know, I always found it very interesting when we look up these different, like when we're doing numbers and we're trying to figure out, you know, how many albums, releases, or whatever. And I thought I knew until I started really looking at it. I was like, that's a pretty incredible thing. So, but anyhow, you know, I'm going to just briefly mention The Big Pink by the band and how influential of an album The Big Pink really is. Now, The Big Pink is the album is named after the band's house over in Woodstock, New York. So it was so intensely important to the band. I mean, that is, I think, their signature album. Yes, they've done The Last Waltz, which is an amazing, compilation of artists pulling together for a final show from the band. And it was actually the very last time the band ever played. They intended to get back together, believe it or not, but they never did.
And what's unique about that Last Waltz movie and the artists that they brought in, there were a couple of exceptions to the rule, but most of them were what we would probably consider to be American artists that were writing in the vein of Americana. You think through that list of who's on that thing. I mean, they were really embracing their own roots by the artists. You look at the artists that they brought in. I mean, there's like Eric Clapton and Van Morrison were from England, or Great Britain, but they certainly embraced a lot of our elements. But there were many others that were on that concert. That, you know, Muddy Waters, I think, was on there doing his thing. Even somebody who we would even think of as not relating to it, Neil Diamond, was on there. But he was of the old school style of writing American music, embracing some of the Americana.
Yeah, I mean, And I think these are really strong bands that we're pulling out, and I think there are other ones out there as well. They may not be at the same level of intensity, but they do have the idea or the sound,
Yeah.
that rustic quality. And again, this is what I said earlier, you could be sitting out there thinking to myself, oh, I have this other band in mind, and that's great. And that's the whole idea. We just want to spark your imagination,
Yeah.
basically talk about these things, because it's not something that you will hear as a documentary kind of thing. If you're flipping through the channels late at night, you're looking
No,
for something to watch on television.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever come across anything talking about this, and I would
No.
love to see something like this out there that was.
It comes up more in the research of as we're looking at other bands and
Yeah.
other things. This idea of roots or Americana comes up more and more often, and then so we started to seek it out.
Right.
And you can start to hear then when you listen to this music, oh yeah, this. Oh yeah, this sounds like this, or this sounds like this. I can
There's a
see
familiarity to it.
Yeah, there is a familiarity to it.
And so that kind of leads me into the Dead for a moment. And when we talk about the Grateful Dead, in the early parts of the Dead's career in the 60s, very early 70s, when Pigpen was doing most of the singing, Pigpen's background was really about country music, not so much country, but more of like that rhythm and blues and into the blues. And he did, Viola Lee Blues is a perfect example, just a great song. But as the band was evolving and Bob Weir was doing more and more writing, the idea of the psychedelic movement was pulling away, and Bob was starting to write these country melodies, these country songs, like, we have El Paso and Cumberland Blues. Uncle John's Band is a perfect example. And those, to me, those songs epitomize the idea of what Americana is. It's that dusty trail. It's that going out west kind of thing.
Yep.
It's that rustic idea. I have to bring that word back in.
And Jerry Garcia had the bluegrass background,
Absolutely.
On the banjo,
And a strong influence throughout the entire Dead.
and they were some of the cover tunes that they did were some of the old protest songs, some of the old folk music songs. Casey's what was it?
Casey Jones.
Casey Jones. That is an old folk tale, and that was an old tune that they redid in their own way. So again, they were embracing. This
Yeah, and again,
early
Robert
Americana.
Hunter was a big part of that writing process too. And when you talk about bands, sometimes we always think that it's just the artist writing, but the artists do draw upon other writers to
for
help
sure.
them, and we tend to forget that sometimes. And I think that's a pretty important piece to kind of throw out there for this Americana session. So,
And I would even say with the Grateful Dead, beyond even the Americana, Phil Lesh, their bass player, was brought up in the whole world of experimental avant-garde classical music. So he brought a whole different element in, which took all these other elements and kind of was this underlying glue that kind of transcends it beyond the Americana. But that could be a whole other episode.
another show right there. Absolutely, it could be.
In itself.
So I guess we could kind of just recap a little
Yep.
bit, and there are some other bands possibly to consider in all of this idea of Americana sound. We talked about Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Creedence Clearwater Revival obviously should be on that. I think that really awesome, gritty guitar work.
Yep.
And there's other bands out there you could
Lots of other
probably
bands, for sure.
definitely
Yep.
could include onto this category. And obviously we can't do all of it, but tell us what you think.
Hopefully this gave you some food for thought.
Absolutely.
And that, like we said earlier, it's not labeled as Americana necessarily. It's not labeled as roots music. But if you were to look at a band that you really like and see those words, maybe this will give you a little bit of an idea of what's meant behind that, and maybe to explore more that's out there. I mean, there are.
Yeah, we're just trying to trigger your thought
Yeah.
process. The idea again, is to
Yeah.
say, here's a really cool topic, hopefully, and
There's plenty more out there, and I think there are plenty more very contemporary groups that we are just not aware of right now. But I think the tradition is alive. I think there are bands that are out there that are not the popular bands right now that are embracing a lot of these elements of American music. I mean, what an incredible diversity of music this country has
for sure.
developed.
And that's what keeps this thing going.
Yeah,
called
exactly.
the music industry. So, with that being said, we are our new version, which is JaMs, Jim and Mark's Rock and Roll Museum. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll come back at you just shortly with another one and just as good as this one.
Yep.
We hope you like this. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, follow us. We'd love to have your comments if you have something you want to say and share. Otherwise, I'm Mark. This is Jim. And you guys have a great one. Till next time.
Bye-bye.